There's like a timer. Ah, now it's
Oh,
live. Now we're
right.
live.
Now
Comment
we're live.
section, please let us know if you can see and hear us.
Hey guys, hey guys. Sorry about that. Sorry about the delay. I had some few technical issues. Yeah, and it, it got so bad at one point. I'm completely out of practice with these live chats. We were talking along, and then I realized it wasn't showing on YouTube, and people weren't responding to what we were trying to say. So let us know if you can hear us, and thanks everyone for joining. And really appreciate everyone for coming in. We have Brian Berletic with us. Needs no introduction, from New Atlas, and he's been on the show a few times before. So we're going to be talking about some of the latest issues. You can see we've put some talking points in this notepad. It's nothing fancy, but you're just here to kind of listen to us, what we have to say anyway. So you're not looking for anything fancy like what other YouTubers do. But thanks for joining, Brian. How are you? How's your day, and how you doing?
For the second time, I'm doing very well. I'm very
Good.
happy to be here. I know what you mean though. If you haven't done a live video in a while, I mean a lot. It's what people make it look very easy to do, but it actually
Yeah,
isn't all
yeah.
that easy to coordinate it. Plus, also interview people all at the same time. I'm sure you're like me. You're a one man operation. So
Exactly. Yeah, I haven't done it for a while because I've been really busy with my new job, and it's been hard to schedule any live chats. But yeah, thanks for joining, Brian. Without wasting any more time, let's get started. We'll talk about the first most important topic of the day, which was the Kremlin attack. There was two drones flying over the Kremlin, and looks like from the video they got blown away last minute by Russian anti-aircraft or some other means. I can't tell from the footage, but it looks like from a distance, it looks like they were blown up just before it hit one of the domes. And obviously, there's debris damage. I was reading some of the newspapers this morning, and you can see already some of the propaganda coming out of the West, especially the British propaganda, that this was an assassination attempt on Putin. Um, it was no such assassination attempt. I mean, let's make that clear. It was an attack on the Kremlin, and everyone. And it seems a very really dodgy why they're coming up with this narrative about trying to get rid of Putin and etc. And it does seem like everything's related with this counteroffensive Ukraine was supposed to do. Maybe the West has fallen out of love out of Zelensky. He wasn't even in the country. He was in Finland, and everybody knows he's got no control over his army. He's got no control over Ukraine. He's really is a face, a puppet, and I wouldn't think Zelensky would do anything like that just because he's got a lot of money, he's got a lot of properties around the world. And the last thing he wants to do is attack the Kremlin and get targeted by the Russians and get killed. I'm sure, he's got a lot of money to retire once it's done. But there's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of theories going around the internet, whether this was done by Ukraine, this was done by rogue Azov military, whether this was done from within Russia. And there's a lot of stories coming around. What's your thoughts about it, Brian? What do you think about this whole situation?
well, again, it's hard to tell right now. We have just little bits of information. I've been hearing that it was electronic countermeasures that destroyed the drones somehow. I don't know. I would assume that Russia has its best equipment there in Moscow protecting the Kremlin. A lot of people are suggesting, especially pro-Ukrainian voices out there, are suggesting that this was a false flag. And several exhibits of evidence include the fact that there were people on top of the buildings already in position before the drones came. And they're forgetting that, say, on top of the White House, there are security personnel 24/7 on top of the White House, around the White House, and inside the White House, in the centers of global power around the world. that is how it's done, and Russia is no exception. So that is a ridiculous line of reasoning. I've also heard people say, because it's very obvious that attacking the Kremlin like this gives Moscow a blank check to politically mobilize Russian society even further in terms of this military operation in Ukraine. Another mobilization, mobilizing industry and the economy, things like this. It would be very easy for Moscow to do this because Russian people see their own country under attack. And people say, well, of course, then who benefits the most? Moscow benefits the most. But as I point out, since 2014, that's all the client regime in Kiev has done from 2014 onward is provoke a war with Russia, giving Russia justification for waging war against Ukraine, fighting against the regime, removing the regime, demilitarizing Ukraine. From 2014 onward, they passed laws attacking their own Russian-speaking population. They waged physical war against their own Russian-speaking population. And they were militarizing, with NATO's help, specifically to transform the country into a battering ram against Russia. And we remember papers from the Rand Corporation 2019 extending Russia, and was the number one option, was giving lethal aid to Ukraine, provoking Russia, forcing Russia to invest deeply in military operations in Ukraine to bleed it dry. And so the idea that, oh, well, this is a provocation that allows Russia to escalate, so obviously Russia benefits from this. No, the people who benefit most from this are the ones who want to see a continued proxy war continue between Ukraine and Russia. And so this is one of the results. An attack on the Kremlin is going to help grease the wheels to keep this proxy war going and to prevent any sort of peace deal. And just as you say, AJ, it paints Zelensky into a corner. And this is a guy who wants to enjoy all of his cash and his fame and his notoriety. He wants to enjoy all of that. He doesn't want to die fighting this. He wants other people to die fighting this proxy war for him, but he doesn't want to die.
Exactly.
So, and he has no control over his own forces, and he's not in charge of any sort of military operation. It's the White House, and it's their proxies in Ukraine, in the military, and in these paramilitary organizations that are almost certainly supported by various organizations in the US government and intelligence. Just think about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It could be something in the same vein as that, where it was pretty much the US doing it as part of this proxy war with Russia through Ukraine. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I think, like, for people who think that it is a false flag attack organized by the Kremlin itself, let's just wait and see what Russia does. And if Russia retaliates, but in a very measured, reasonable way, and they continue fighting this conflict the same way that they've been fighting it since February 2022, then it's very obvious it wasn't a false flag, because they're not utilizing it in any shape, form, or way. If there is a drastic escalation or some sort of unprecedented form of escalation, then it may be tempting to at least keep our minds open to that possibility. So we'll just have to wait and see. We have to wait for more evidence to come out. We also have to wait and see how Russia reacts to this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And it raises a few questions, really. I mean, first of all, where were the anti-aircraft or anti-drone guns before they went to the Kremlin? And they would have had to fly all the way from Ukraine into Russia, unless they've been flown from within Russia. Then obviously that brings up more questions. And secondly, do you think this is going to push Russia to go further into Ukraine, like take Kharkiv and go all the way to the Dnieper River, and then after that go into Odessa, and basically Russia's gonna say, we want to basically create as much space between Russia and the West as possible. So we want to go inwards more into Ukraine, and this is just going to give them more impetus to go further in. And also, just want to clarify about Zelensky. I mean, do you think this is a coincidence that there was a phone call between Zelensky and President Xi of China, and they were basically talking. They were having peace talks behind the scenes. There were obviously diplomats being sent into Ukraine, and this was being discussed over the last week or so. So, do you think that, yeah, like you said, do you think this is a coincidence, or maybe somebody who doesn't want any peace has basically thought, you know what, let's do something which will completely destroy all peace talks. Let's attack the Kremlin. And this way, Russia will definitely not want to have any peace talks with Ukraine. And this will just escalate things. I mean, what are your thoughts on those couple of inquiries I made?
So I'll start with the third one first. That's a very compelling idea, actually, that someone does not want to see any sort of peace break out. Who would that be? That would be the U.S. They are the ones who are upset about peace breaking out everywhere. Everywhere China goes, everywhere Russia and China go together, actually, and they're reorganizing the map that the U.S. has divided up and has been destroying since the end of World War II. So that is a possibility that someone is involved in. It could be, again, it could be people within Ukraine working with the U.S. It could even be the U.S. itself. Now, as far as going to the first point, this drone, virtually any drone can be weaponized. DJI drones are being weaponized in Ukraine right now, and so anyone that can buy a drone can weaponize it, and then they can operate. They can get it. They can order it through the mail in Russia, get it delivered to them. They can weaponize it, and then they can have it take off locally in Moscow and carry out the attack. This is something that's very dangerous. The problem with drones are they're small. They're not. There's not a lot of metal in them. Their radar cross section is almost non-existent, and so you need to use other very specialized measures to deal with them. And I'm sure that Russia is going to reconsider these measures and how they have to evolve these to truly protect key, crucial places like the Kremlin, for example. Now, so where was the air defense? I mean, the air defense was there, but it might not have been the most appropriate system to deal with these smaller drones. And something obviously took them out. We just have to wait and see what that was. What additional impetus does it give Russia to go into Ukraine or to change their objectives? I don't think they're going to change their objectives. I think they already know that they need as much space between them and the rest of NATO. They understand that they need to fully demilitarize Ukraine. So, like I said, it could, to a certain degree, allow Moscow to mobilize the Russian population further in ways that would have been more politically difficult otherwise. I believe that Ukraine is going to give Russia a steady stream of provocations that will allow them to do that. Because, like I said, the U.S. put a client regime into power in Kiev from 2014 onward in the first place to be extremely anti-Russian and to provoke Russia and the Russian population in exactly this way. So they are their own worst enemy. Everything that they are doing is on the path to self-destruction via this military operation by Russia. But before that, before the special military operation, they were destroying their economy by cutting their ties irrationally with Russia. So it's a very self-destructive client regime that is running the country into the ground, and now they're doing it militarily as well as socially, politically, and economically.
I don't know if you had a chance to look at the interview by Zelensky, and he was almost in tears, and he was saying things like, oh, we don't have weapons, we don't have the capability of attacking Russia, we don't even have the capability to defend ourselves, we need weapons, we need manpower, we're too focused on Ukraine, how can we be focused on attacking Russia? So did you see his groveling interview? I don't know if you've seen it. He was in Finland at the time, but I happen to think it was quite genuine. I happen to think he actually did not know what was happening because he was in Finland at the time, and if he had any idea this was happening, somebody's going to attack the Kremlin, he would not be in Finland. He would be hiding somewhere, hiding in a bunker somewhere, for example. he would not be flying around, between Finnish and Ukrainian airspace, because he knows if any, and if an attack went on to Kremlin, then he would be absolutely blown out the sky. So I think it's there's definitely somebody else who's trying to um, confiscate the peace talks. And also, I don't know if you watched the Grey Zone. The Grey Zone recently released a video that a couple of the hijackers from 9/11 were CIA operatives. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was basically something to do with that. I mean, what's your? I know it's a conspiracy theory, but I just want to see what your thoughts are regarding all that.
Yeah, again, well, I mean, let's think about it though. Zelensky being in Finland or on his way to Finland, that actually would be very politically risky for Russia to down his plane somewhere in NATO airspace, for example. That would be seen as a major escalation in an act of war. At least NATO would see it that way. So actually, him being in Finland while this happened, that actually makes him look more guilty. And it might have been times for him to be in Finland for exactly that point. I don't think that he's in charge or masterminding any of this. He may be aware of some of these things, but probably mostly not. And so the likelihood that it was someone in Ukrainian intelligence or the Ministry of Defense working with the United States, that's very probable. I think that is most probable, actually. And again, yeah, it goes back to who wants to prevent peace at all costs? Who wants Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian? The U.S. government does. They've openly said so. Had Lindsey Graham say they will fight to the last man. If we create the right conditions, they will fight to the last man. That's what they're doing. That is exactly what they're doing. So I'm almost certain that there are interests in Ukraine that are enthusiastic about doing this. And the U.S. is happy to give them all the help and resources that they need to do so.
Thanks for that, Brian. And yeah, we've got around 550 viewers, which is not bad from my first live chat after like a few months, maybe 4 or 5 months now. If you can help promote it by liking and sharing it, that would be really, really helpful. So any of you guys that are listening, help the algorithm, really appreciate it. So I'm going to go into something different, Brian, and you can see from the notepad, Mark Hamill. Are you a Star Wars fan at all? And people might think, why have I put Mark Hamill drones on my notepad? But if you follow the news closely, Mark Hamill was very much instrumental in getting drones for Ukraine, and not many people know that. He's been an ambassador for raising funds for drones for Ukraine. And I don't know about you, Brian, but Mark Hamill used to be a big hero of mine because I'm a major Star Wars fan. And when I heard this, I was devastated. What are your thoughts? And do you think Mark Hamill had something to do with these drones attacking Kremlin? Or do you think Mark Hamill should go into hiding?
No, I don't think he had anything to do with this. But yeah, I used to like Star Wars. I don't know what's going on. I guess Disney is bent on ruining absolutely everything from our childhood.
Yeah.
But Mark Hamill, he's one of these. This is common with many people in Hollywood. They're actors and actresses. They get paid to say whatever they're told to say, and that's what they do for a living. And they're not most of them. I don't want to paint with too broad of a stroke, but most of them have no idea what's going on. They watch the mainstream media like most other people in the West, and they're just as badly misinformed as everyone else. And so he's doing this drone thing, probably thinking he's doing the right thing. I saw him on Twitter. Actually, I was one of the people that helped point this out. He was doing some video conference with Ukrainians receiving these drones, and one of them very prominently in the background had a Nazi flag, literally a Nazi flag in the background, one of these red and black Nazi Banderite flags. And people were pointing it out and saying, there's a literal Nazi flag in the background. This is who you're helping, Mr. Hamill. You're helping the Nazis. Everything Russia said is true. Look at it. It's right in front of you. And he said he doesn't care about what the flag meant. This was his reply. He doesn't care what the flag means. He's just upset because Russia's invading Ukraine. But if there are Nazis literally everywhere, you cannot point the camera anywhere in Ukraine and not see Nazis running around, and also Nazis getting these drones and using them, that you're helping get to them. Maybe the reason they're being invaded is because they're Nazis. This point of logic never dawned on him. But then again, he's an actor, so again, we're expecting too much for him. He's an actor. He didn't even write Star Wars, let alone it. So he's just the actor playing the role of a hero.
That's
I think
right.
we expect too much from him. But it's a perfect example of how ignorant people are in the West, and how dangerous and even deadly ignorance can be, to the point where you're unwittingly helping modern day Nazis kill people.
Yeah, exactly. And even though Mark Hamill, he's an actor, he has got a huge following. And if he puts stuff like this out on Twitter and he raises money for, these drones, there's a lot of Star Wars fans that would absolutely idolize him, and they would do anything he says. So obviously, they picked him for a reason. And
Yes.
yeah, it's a shame, because he was one of my heroes. Even though he's an actor, he was still a symbol of hope. He was still Luke Skywalker. But yeah, I felt sorry for him when he was killed off in The Last Jedi. I think they did him quite dirty in The Last Jedi, made him into some sort of useless male, and they did him quite dirty, and felt sorry for him, but not anymore. Anyway, let's move on. um, so this counteroffensive, everyone's been talking about it, but there's nothing to see. I mean, there's no counteroffensive. I mean, they did attack Crimea, attacked an oil depot a couple of days ago. And I've also been looking at a lot of Telegram sites, and there was one particular Telegram site where Ukraine was basically gathering lots of troops, and they were gathering about hundreds of troops with armored carriers. And what Russia did, Russia dropped this massive bomb where they were gathering, absolutely massive. And this bomb was like was probably one of the most destructive bombs I've seen in this war, and completely wiped them all out. And we're talking about hundreds, maybe even thousands of Ukrainians who were just gathering around in one space. I saw that happening a few days ago in Telegram, and this was they showed you on the video, and I think that probably put off a lot of Ukrainians, and I think they thought, you know what, let's just forget about the counteroffensive. What are your thoughts about the counteroffensive? Is it going to happen, or is it? I mean, they literally have no troops left. I mean, they're literally pulling people from the streets, pushing them into the front lines. They're literally begging for weapons, money. They've got no anti-aircraft guns. They've hardly got any tanks left. There was a story about 3 airplanes which were given by Slovakia and Poland. They were shot down in one day. So, so I mean, what do you think about this counteroffensive? Is it still going to happen, or is it just going to use these men as a meat grinder and just send them all to their deaths? I don't know if you've seen Lord of the Rings. There's a part in Lord of the Rings where the king sends all of his troops into certain death with no there's no chance of them winning or coming back alive. He just sends them to their death for no apparent reason. So I see that comparison. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the offensive is still on. Just like last year, they said they were going to do a spring-summer offensive, and it ended up being a fall offensive. And we remember the results of that offensive. Even the Western media eventually admitted that, say, in Kharkov, there were hardly any Russian forces there. That's why they were able to take all of that territory. Despite there hardly being any Russian forces there, Ukraine still suffered major casualties. They lost anywhere between 1 to 2, maybe even 3 brigades, not just fighting the very few troops that were dug in, but also because Russia utilized its long-range weaponry against the advancing Ukrainian forces. They're out from behind their defenses. It's much easier to target them out in the open as they're moving, and that's what happened there. And then in Kherson, Russian forces were heavily dug in. There was a huge presence around Kherson City, and Ukrainian forces repeatedly tried to break through defensive lines, and they repeatedly failed. And I remember very distinctively the Washington Post writing an article about the nature of the warfare, how lopsidedly in favor of Russia it was. And there they lost probably between 5 to 7 brigades worth of men and equipment. And they spent the whole time from the fall onward waiting for NATO to deliver another army's worth of equipment and ammunition, and also to train another army's worth of manpower. Now, you're talking about the troops, and they're grabbing these people off the streets. This is probably for territorial defense, and this is the force that they're just throwing at the Russians in places like Bakhmut to try to hold the line. They're also using elite forces to kind of bolster the territorial defenses. They have a separate army, supposedly. They have a separate army that they've been training in the UK, across the EU, being trained by the US, by the Germans, by others. They're supposed to be the assault force that they're building up for this offensive. A lot of these are supposedly, again, this is what the Western media is saying. Is it true? I don't know. They're saying that they're new recruits. They have no military experience. They're being trained for, say, 5 weeks, when in reality you get trained between 5 to 6 months to be an entry-level infantryman who still has to learn an awful lot when they finally get to their unit after basic training and their infantry training. They will still have a lot to learn when they get to their unit. But these guys are getting 5 weeks of training, and then they're expected to go on the offensive. It's insane, and it's irresponsible. It's inhumane, and they will die in droves, just like last year, the fall offensive. Whenever this offensive goes, they will be dying in droves. Now, people are saying maybe the offensive won't happen. If it happens, it'll be a complete flop. I don't think people should underestimate the capabilities of this offensive force that they're putting together, because people have to remember it's smaller, it's poorly armed compared to Russian forces, a smaller amount of ammunition, but they will concentrate what little they have along the front line in just a couple of spots, and they will be able to overwhelm the Russian forces there locally. Now, will Russia be able to move reserves around and respond to it, prevent them from taking territory? Will they, just as they've done before, give up territory, knowing that they're going to destroy a huge number of Ukrainian troops, destroy all of their equipment, and wherever the Ukrainian offensive ends on the map, they will be exhausted, their ammunition depleted, their weapons destroyed. And if Russia preserves its manpower and equipment, where does that leave Ukraine? At the end of the losing end of a war of attrition, you talked about tanks, air defense, and aircraft. Well, their aircraft virtually non-existent and playing no role in this conflict at all. Their air defense is actually the reason we see this artillery war unfolding, and the reason why Russia moves so incrementally across the battlefield, because of Ukrainian air defense, which ironically is mostly Soviet-era equipment. It's very effective. They had large amounts of it, and they were able to essentially inhibit Russia from operating openly over Ukrainian airspace, except along the line of contact in a very limited way, close air support at low altitudes. But more recently, you just talked about that bomb, that massive bomb. They've been dropping a lot of massive bombs along the line of contact. They're able to do this because the longer range air defense systems like the S-300, the number of interceptors are dwindling. They've been destroying the actual launchers themselves. These cannot be replaced, and NATO has nothing that is equivalent to give Ukraine for them to replace them with. So as the S-300s dwindle in numbers, they're going to keep most of them around cities and other priority targets, and the line of contact is going to be defended only by shorter range systems like the Buk, ASA, Strela, 10, systems like this. They're highly mobile. They're very effective. They can reach a bomber overhead at maximum altitude, but what they cannot do is reach the range of the glide bombs that Russia is using, which have a 40-kilometer range. They drop the bomb, and it glides 40 kilometers to its target. This is out of range of the air defense systems that Ukraine still has along the front line. So this is a huge problem for Ukraine. And I think one of the reasons the West is pushing so hard to get Ukraine to do this offensive now rather than later is because the air defense problem is only going to grow. It's only going to get bigger. People mistakenly believe this is a cycle where Ukraine does their offensive, then they get reloaded, resupplied, they build up a new army of men, and then they do it again. But actually, each iteration of this process, Ukrainians are worn out more. They're out of more crucial types of systems that NATO cannot help them replace, to the point where eventually there is going to be a critical and complete collapse of Ukrainian fighting capacity. That's what Russia is waiting for. A lot of people are like, especially during the winter, a lot of people said Russia is going to do this big arrow offensive during the winter. And I just didn't think that they would. Number one, they never said that they were going to. Number two, it made no sense, because if they launch something like that, they will lose large numbers of men and machines, just like Ukraine does when they launch an offensive. And this is a war of attrition. So the idea is to kill more of them than you lose. Russia does this by using this incremental, step-by-step approach that they've been using. That's why it's taking so long to take Bakhmut, because they don't want to bleed their own army to death.
Yeah.
They want to bleed Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, I was listening to a lot of Bakhmut reports, and from all sides, from Western side as well as the Russian side as well. And it seems to me not a lot of people are actually reporting this, but I was looking at kind of all the military reports every day, and what Russia has been doing is slowly encircling Bakhmut, and they have been blocking all the streets going in and out of Bakhmut. But they basically left one major route open. And what they're doing is inviting the Ukrainians in, and also they're inviting the Ukrainians to get out as well. And while they're coming in, they're attacking them. And while they're trying to escape, they're also attacking them as well. And Ukraine is suffering huge losses in Bakhmut just on that piece of road, and they've basically got open. But Russia's doing that on purpose, because it's not about taking the Bakhmut. It's all about the war of attrition. I mean, they're just trying to get rid of many Azovs as possible. And I think a lot of people don't report that. And this is what taking Bakhmut is not the key. That's why it's taking so long, because it's not about taking Bakhmut. It's all about trying to get rid of Ukraine's military. And what's your thoughts on that? I mean, a lot of people are not really reporting on that.
Well, exactly. And General Sergei Surovikin said in the fall, he said that the whole point, he's going to stabilize the front line, he's going to straighten everything out. And then what the goal is from that point onward is to grind down the Ukrainian military. Bakhmut is designed to grind down Ukrainian forces. President Vladimir Zelensky visited Bakhmut. Now he has supposedly visited several times. They are politically invested in that city. They cannot give it up. And so they are going to pour their entire army into Bakhmut. And that's what they've been doing. And Russia is using the private military company Wagner to grind them down. They're not even using the majority of their reservists that they mobilized late last year. So it's a huge blunder on Ukraine's part. And for people who are saying, well, look at how much territory Russia is taking, there are different kinds of wars. This is a war of attrition. It is not a war of territorial conquest. Yeah. When the Ukrainian military collapses, Russia is going to be able to take as much territory as they want, because there will be no Ukrainian military to defend it. I don't understand why people can't. I mean, the Western media is full of journalists, so-called journalists, who think in very simple, one-dimensional ways, and they cannot understand this. Plus, it's very inconvenient for their political narratives, and so this goes more or less unreported, undiscussed.
Yeah, and also Bakhmut, they are using Bakhmut as a focal point. So a lot of Ukrainian military troops are going in and out, and Ukraine is basically focused on Bakhmut, and this gives Russia time to focus on other areas. Like if your main focus is Bakhmut, and the world's media is focused on Bakhmut, and Ukrainians are focused on Bakhmut, you as a Russian military can basically go out and do other missions around Ukraine. It basically gives you a free reign, because you're if all of if Ukraine is basically focused on that Bakhmut area, they'll be less focused on other areas. And I think this is a kind of tactic, and this is why they left one road open in and out of Bakhmut. They are basically inviting the Ukrainians to come in and just focus on it. And while Russia is doing other things around Ukraine, I think they are also um, setting up defenses as well. I mean, as a military force, this is exactly what I would do. I would leave one road open in and out, and this goes back to the art of war tactics as well. And I think if you are from the military side, which you are, Brian, I mean, this makes perfect sense. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Exactly. You don't corner an enemy, because then they will fight as hard as possible to get
Yeah,
out. You give them an avenue of escape, and then it's always an option that they will think about in the back of their mind. And while they're planning whatever they're going to do that day, if it goes wrong, we could just get on the road and get out. So that is a valid point. Is a little more complicated. There are other conflicts taking place along the line of contact. Avdiivka is another city that is almost completely encircled by Russian forces. This is a place where one of the places they began dropping these huge bombs, these glide bombs. And they made a lot of progress very quickly. And now it's kind of also frozen. This looks like a letter C, a backwards letter C. And all of these Ukrainian forces are coming in trying to prevent Avdiivka from being taken. And this is right outside Donetsk city, where Ukraine has been shelling the civilian population in Donetsk city for 9 years. So there was that. There's Vuhledar. This is another point along the line of contact. And, people are like, well, Russia failed to take it, but they only have a few units working on Vuhledar. It's not a full-scale operation.
yeah,
They're putting pressure along the line of contact to kind of gauge the fighting capacity of Ukraine overall. And it's still holding. The line of contact is still holding for Ukraine, but we can see it's weakening. And with the glide bombs, for example, it's little incremental things like this where it just the pressure keeps growing and growing and growing, and a support here breaks, a support there begins to crack until the whole thing collapses. This is the strategy Russia has elected to use.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. And before I go into the next topic, I wanted to ask you a question. If you were Putin right now, and obviously you've had the Kremlin attack, what would you do differently, or would you keep things the same, or what would you do? What would you change if you were Putin?
No, I think the strategy that they're pursuing right now is the best for Russia, considering the circumstances and resources they have available to them. With the Kremlin attack, they can use this to mobilize society in any way that they needed to already up until this point, but maybe didn't have the political capital to do so. Now they have some political capital to do so, so they might want to take advantage of that. But other than that, I mean, you have to continue this very patient process of conducting this military operation. There's no guarantee that NATO isn't going to try to enter it more directly in some way, just as they did in Syria. And so they have to conserve their military fighting capacity as much as possible while wearing down Ukraine. They have to keep a force in reserve to deal with NATO if they were to enter the conflict in some way. And ultimately only the Kremlin knows where their actual red lines are and what they will do to enforce them. Only they know that. We don't know that, sitting here looking from the outside in.
Sure, thanks for that. And before I go into the next topic, this super chat just came online asking you a question, and here's my first super chat. So thanks for that, Harry. Really, really appreciate it. And this is why I got you on board to ask your question. So do you want to quickly answer that, and then we'll move on?
this Bahamut missile, it's primarily for delivering a nuclear payload to targets, and I don't know what kind of crater it would create if it was using just some sort of conventional warhead. The problem is they wouldn't want to do that, because when they see incoming intercontinental ballistic missile, they don't know what warhead is on it. They're going to assume that it's nuclear, and they will retaliate. So you would never do that, and we would never find out what kind of crater this would be. I don't think it would be the size of France. That seems. France is a pretty big. It's a pretty big country.
We have to talk about maybe a meteorite falling into there to get a crater size.